she says.
All right, here I go, and you're on first. Here we are. Hello, good evening. I'm Lyda Dubin. I'm the Executive Director here at the Center for Fiction. How many of you are joining us for the first time tonight? Show of hands? Wonderful. Lots of new folks. Welcome. So what is the Center for Fiction? We invest in the future of story, and we focus on fiction. We're a home for readers and writers in downtown Brooklyn. We provide space for the city's creative community to write, to read, and talk books over coffee. We offer reading groups and writing workshops and steward a historic lending library collection. We support early career writers through our nationally recognized First Novel Prize and mentor a cohort of 9 talented emerging writer fellows. And lastly, we engage the youngest readers in our city through a public school partnership program called Kids Read, putting books directly into the hands of young people at kid-centered authored events in this room. So follow us on social, sign up for the mailing list, become a member, and please come back and see us. All right. So important logistics. Welcome to those of you joining us tonight via live stream. After the talk, we'll have an audience Q&A. If you're here in the room, raise your hand and one of our wonderful interns will bring you a microphone. Please do use the mic so that the guests on live stream can hear you. And then for those of you on YouTube, add your questions to the chat and we'll read from those before we break for the signing line. Jill was kind enough to pre-sign her books, and so we'll be doing a personalization line after the event. All right. And now for the main event. Through our Art of the Short Stories series, we at the Center for Fiction celebrate the endless possibilities for storytelling in short form. And no one is more perfect for this series than Jill McCorkle, who masterfully uses short fiction to delve into the rich lives of her characters and craft vibrant stories of affection, regret, and longing. And in conversation with her is legendary short story writer Amy Hempel, author of 5 award-winning story collections, most recently Sing to It. We can't wait for this conversation about old crimes and this fabulous art form. Jill and Amy, welcome.
Hello. Oh. Let's have a quick look at who might be out there.
I see many.
Oh my goodness.
Thank you for coming out tonight. It's very exciting.
It's such an honor to get to do this. Jill is a longtime, very dear friend, and I will say a little something about our decades, I think, of co-teaching workshops at Bennington in the graduate writing seminars. We're going to continue doing that privately. And I'll say a little bit more about that shortly. Just when you buy your own copy, you can I'll read this, but it's worth mentioning. This is a really impressive background leading up to this new collection. And by the way, I think your last book, Hieroglyphics, was your 7th novel, and Old Crimes is your 5th story collection. Yes. So just personally, I'm really glad the story collections are catching up. More stories. It's part of the lore of Jill that she published her first 2 novels on the same day, and it was your 26th birthday.
It was right around there.
Who does that? I mean, talk about an auspicious beginning. And 5 of their books have been on the New York Times notable books. 4 or more stories in Best American, that anthology. She's received the New England Booksellers Award, the John Dos Passos Prize for Excellence in Literature, the North Carolina Award for Literature, and the Thomas Wolfe Prize. And was recently inducted into the North Carolina Literary Hall of Fame. Jill has taught also at Harvard, Brandeis, North Carolina State, and as I mentioned, for many, many years, for all the existing years of the Bennington graduate seminars. I think first you're going to read a little bit, and then we're going to go in many directions at once.
I'll just open with a brief reading. And again, it's such an honor to be here in this beautiful space, and with you, Amy, a writer whose work I greatly admire, and I'm grateful for all the years teaching. So this story is called The Lineman, and I'll just read a little bit of the introduction to the character and then tell you a tiny bit and then finish. I think it should be self-explanatory who he is. I am a lineman for the county. It's true, and there was a time when Pam laughed when I said that, but now she just smirks and turns away. Now she monitors the time I spend with Amanda and counts the days until the divorce comes through. Whenever I pick Amanda up for dinner, a wave of teenage cologne and strange hair colors, there's yet another pasteboard box or torn grocery bag Pam has left on the steps with some of my belongings: old shaving cream, single socks, junk mail. I love that song, Wichita Lineman, and have since the first time I heard Glenn Campbell singing it in 1968 when I was only 12 years old. I read in an interview where the guy who wrote the song saw somebody out in Oklahoma way up a pole working all by himself and said it was the picture of loneliness. That phrase, picture of loneliness, has stuck with me all these years, coming to mind when I see a certain look cross a person's face, the look my mama often had when she thought no one was watching her. This is a man in the midst of a very uncomfortable divorce, and at one end he's got the 14-year-old he's desperately trying to hold on to, and the other end a mother with dementia. And so after years of putting up telephone lines and producing communication means, he's having trouble reaching these people in his life. And throughout the story, he ruminates a little bit on just the shifts in communication. So I'll give you a sample of one of those. Did I say how there used to be silence? And now I'm wondering what people are going to do when the big blow comes, when all the lines are knocked out and the generators fail and we're turned back to a day guided by nothing but the sun and the moon. Do you know how to read a clock face? Have you memorized addresses and phone numbers? Do you know how to read a map? I ask Amanda, who sometimes listens but most times doesn't. I say how it used to be a person actually had to get up and walk to one place in the house to answer the phone, that it was tethered there to the wall with cords and a plug that slid neatly into a jack that people like me came and installed. You had to get up off your ass to change the channel, too. Sometimes you had to put tinfoil on rabbit ears and twist your body this way and that to pick up one of the 3 channels available in our area. The phone was a separate entity itself, a station, a fixture, not an appendage to interrupt you 10 million times a day. My old mama had a chair built into a little table that was just for the telephone. And you had a dictionary on the shelf to look up something you didn't know. People had things like World Book. My old mama didn't have anything but Funk and Wagnalls, and I was jealous of the World Book crowd. First thing I did as a married man with a baby coming was to go out and buy a set. And Pam, who had just started taking classes at the university, looked at me like I was a fool. "Of course you got a good buy," she yelled. Amanda, who we just called the baby at the time, filling her abdomen. "It's like buying dinosaur food. Where have you been, Ricky?" That was when she still called me Ricky, which I'd been called my whole life. It was right before she got it in her head that I might fit in better if we called me Rick, or even Rich, or Richard. "But my name isn't Richard," I told her. "It's Ricky. On my birth certificate, it says Ricky. And don't ask me why my mama chose to just go with Ricky. For all I know, it was because of Ricky damn Ricardo, but that's just the way it is. Maybe somewhere out there is a guy named Ricky who fathered me, but that's something I'll probably never hear about." "Where have you been, Rick?" She said I had taken a wrong turn and missed the information highway altogether. And that has been her line for me ever since, especially once she went from adjunct to professor and really found her place there with the digital crowd and their little Friday afternoon gatherings at an outdoor cafe where they say things nobody else on the planet can possibly understand. It's the buzz and the wires and the wind up in the trees, and yes, I am left behind in an expansive desert without even the poles and lines to mark the miles. And yes, that is lonely. You have missed the information highway altogether, Rick. "Not altogether," I told her, about the same time everything blew up. I know things. In fact, I had begun following her by then, and I did know things. Now I tell Amanda that she needs to learn how to wait and be patient, be still and know. Somebody famous said that, and if I still had my world books, I might be able to say who. Be still and know. Or maybe it's from the Bible. Pretty sure it's either Walt Whitman, Confucius, or God. I don't Google, so you'll just have to take my word for it. There was a time we had a turntable with speakers the size of small coffins. We had one phone in the kitchen and an extension in the bedroom and only had to dial 5 digits. I grew up with 5 digits, and we didn't go to 7 until I was in high school. The rotary made a nice sound and allowed time to concentrate between numbers, like the sound at the end of an album before the needle is lifted. There was a time when we had silence. It was so quiet, you could hear what someone said. Thank you.
Thank you so much. There's one of the great things in everything you do, certainly in this story, it's in all the stories, is and it's so evocative, that story, but you get it right in the small, and you take on the big concerns, and you get the little parts, the little details exactly right. There's that line of thinking that says, "Oh, get it right in the small, and the large will take care of itself." But I'm thinking of old crimes and secrets and regrets and. Our friend Barry Hanna had a category for certain words. He called them words of high danger, and regret was one of them.
Yes.
Regrets. And you have, of course, I'm going straight to your epigraph from Arthur Miller. "Maybe all one can do is hope to end up with the right regrets." And I have to ask, we did talk about something to do with this a while back, and you, am I right in thinking you quoted, who did you quote? Not Thornton Wilder, that came later.
I think it may have been Thornton Wilder.
Learning something, you talked about learning things you wouldn't maybe learn otherwise. Does that sound familiar?
I don't know.
Or not?
It'll come back.
But regret, I mean, regret is, what do you do with it? What do you do if you feel that? You can't do anything.
Yeah, you know what? I know what we were talking about. What is a right regret? And I think the kind of regret that you actually learn something and still have time to then make a difference.
Yeah.
And yeah, and I was thinking of, you know, we get older and we recognize things about our own parents or someone you knew at another time, and oftentimes it's too late to tell those people, you know, what you see, what you know, what you understand. And so even though it remains a regret, I see it in that category of the right regret, because you've somehow made peace with it, or learned something, or perhaps, you know, anybody who's ever had the experience, which I have, where you think, oh, I'm going to write him a letter.
Fred and Judy.
Yes. And
Fred and Judy Bush, we were talking about.
Yes. Just seeing this wonderful couple and thinking, oh, I need to write him and tell him how moving this has been. His teaching, his presentation, look at
work,
his marriage, this great devotion that you could just see. And I remember thinking, that's what it's supposed to look like. And this was years ago. And you think you've got all the time in the world. And I was always writing that letter to him in my head. And then I learned he had died. And so it was, and then I thought, I'll write her and tell her, and it was one of those sad where this devoted couple sort of went back to back and very quickly. And so it did, you know, now when I think I need to write that person a letter, I address an envelope, you know, as quickly as I can.
Yeah. And there was something we were talking about, which, again, I failed to write it down, but I know you'll remember, that goes back to this whole notion of you get the little things right and the big things.
That is a Thornton Wilder.
Wilder.
That is a quote.
How does that go?
That is a quote that I love, and as a writer, I think I rely on and have for years. When he was talking about our town, he was an archaeologist, a trained archaeologist, and he says that the archaeologist's eye is a combination of the telescope and the microscope, that he's able to explain the very distant by focusing on the very small.
That was
and you know, all those everyday things we take for granted that do translate to the big things.
You have such a good eye always for defining moments, you know, and I think often certainly in these stories and the work before this collection, you see it. You know how you have this experience in your own lives, but you do it on the page so well, where you're in a moment and you feel that everything in your life has brought you to this moment. Everything that's happened has happened as a part of bringing you to reckon with this or to address this. And there's, I'm jumping around a little bit, but I feel that when I read your selections of the tiny things that in a way anchor the big issues, the big subjects. She has a story in this collection in which you know the kind of seafood restaurant that has a fish tank in it? And this one has a fish tank with not just fish, but the bride and groom, a wedding cake topper, and handcuffs.
People just walk by and throw things in.
There's and there's such moving little things. So you get there's a woman whose partner has very recently died, and she watches TV now by herself, and when she finishes watching, she turns the channel back to the channel that he always watched. And, you know, things like that. There's an electrician in another story who is a father, and he wires his daughter's dollhouse so the little eensy lamps actually work. And it's logical. He's an electrician. He loves his daughter. But never heard, I've never seen. There are things, you haven't seen before. And there's back to Thornton Wilder, I meant to ask you. There's a Thornton Wilder prompt that a character who's a teacher gives her class.
Oh, yeah.
Can you talk about that?
Yeah. Well, she has them build a diorama from one of the plays that they have that they've done, and Our Town is one.
But there's also there's the one where you write about the best day.
Oh, yes.
That's another one.
Yes. And it's the whole notion that
the boring
just the most boring day in the world is a very important.
It'll be the most important. Yeah. There's a.
I just about forgot what was in my story. I'm like, which
let me ask. That's allowed.
It's like, that rings a bell.
I know there are a lot of writers here tonight and online.
I know, I see.
And so a couple kind of writerly questions, if you don't mind. Because you do novels and stories, when do you know when you start writing? Do you know, I'm going to write a story now? Or do you know, I'm starting a novel? And along with that, when, in the course of assembling these stories, did you see that they belonged together? They weren't just like, here are the latest stories I've written, but no, they actually belong together.
I think I've gotten better at recognizing what's a story. Though I've often had stories that just never go. And then you get enough of those and you sort of connect them, and then sometimes that moves into a novel. I mean, it's been so interesting because you write these amazing stories and novella.
One. Two. Both accidents. Both accidents.
Yes.
Yeah, accidentally.
Novellas, but I think the work dictates what it's going to be, and I think anytime we try to say, oh, this is this, and we name it before we get to know it and see it.
Yeah.
And that's what it feels like for me. And I think I've always so admired the short story form, and I love to read stories, and they really inspire me as a reader and as a writer early on. But I was that person in class who always got the comment, oh, well, this is doing something, but it feels like part of something bigger.
Yeah.
And so I really am, by nature, I think, more a novelist.
Okay.
And yet I keep coming back to the story form, trying. And so what happens, I get those ideas, but I work on stories the same way I work on a novel. So I sort of stash the ideas, and they're all in this box together. And what happens over time, working on several stories that in different stages, is they do start to connect.
Yeah.
The same way that the pieces of a novel would.
Yeah.
And so in this collection, several of the stories had come earlier. A story called Sparrow, and The Lineman was an older one. Filling Station is a guy. I have had that character in that box for over 20 years.
That's
and
the
could
one.
never find his story.
That's the one. You said there was a story you'd had him on for 20 years.
I could get him to this. It's called Filling Station, and I could get him to the filling station, and he realizes that this filling station has been converted out of this house his grandparents once lived in, and that he stayed as a kid. And
yeah.
And then I could never get the story. So he stayed in the box.
In the box.
And yeah, I don't know. And all of a sudden, I felt like I needed one more story. I wanted another man. Like I've written collections where I might have one man, and I remember Shannon Ravenel saying, "Oh, this man is just being eaten alive by these women. You know, he doesn't belong here. This is," and so you pull out the man, and I really wanted the male voice of the lineman to stay, and so I pulled him out. And but they did, the others really did start to connect thematically for me.
Yeah,
That's the connection.
For a reader too. I like the way your characters are they're always vulnerable, but they're not victims. Stop short. I mean, bad things happen. They do bad things, old crimes, but there's not. You don't feel like victims. I mean.
I'm so glad, because that's hard to be around.
Indeed. And there's this wonderful humanizing thing you do. Like there's a character in a story who, I think, tell me if I've got this right. She's sort of known in a mean way, obviously, as sort of the littlest hooker. Mm-hmm. But. Okay, she's very short. She's the littlest hooker. But listen to this. But then suddenly you learn, and she's sort of a cheap kind of looking character. But then she pulls out a photo, I believe, of her baby and says to someone else, "I'm saving up to get him back." And you're like, oh, everything changes. More importantly, I mean, the characters change towards her. And it's so deftly done. I have goosebumps just remembering it, but it's so deftly done. And there's also this wonderful kind of duality, which is something I love in fiction. It's that whole idea of, we're not, or, things are not this way or this way, they're this way and this way. And there's a character, it might be in the filling station, and I'm sorry if I'm not getting it right, but it's somebody who goes home again. You can't go home again. Well, he goes home again, and I think it's this one. And a local says to him, "You shouldn't have stayed gone so long, or maybe you shouldn't have come at all." Mm-hmm. And Mark Morris dance troupe. Do you hear him? I'm just acknowledging that it's kind of a nice background.
Well, we can all just
come. But all those things are so great, and I'm glad you told us which story was the 20-year story. I had an experience where I had something about that long, and I know why I couldn't do it.
And it was so strange because that was the idea for a story that also came out of that Elizabeth Bishop poem I love, Filling Station.
Oh.
And it's the description of one of those places, and then you notice there are curtains in the window and a plant, and somebody waters the plant, and the last line is, "Somebody loves us all." And I've always, my eye is always drawn to those little windows above businesses, where someone has possibly moved in and made a life.
Yeah, kind of sad. There's the novelist Nancy Lemon once wrote that there's a lot of human condition going around. And it certainly applies to these stories and really to everything that you do. I want to ask you if you can walk us through the making of a story, maybe confessional. I'm always interested in what a writer starts with. What's the little nugget that starts the story? Is it an image, something you overhear? Is it music? Is it language? Is it an idea? And confessional owes its title and everything else to an object. Can you speak to that?
And I will confess that the idea started my scrolling and studying things on eBay, and
I had no idea.
what appeared, but well, I once for my husband's birthday got him one of the tables, the communion tables. That I found in an antique store, and it's pretty cool, big, heavy, weighs a ton. And so I was just looking around, and there was this beautiful confessional. I mean, it was thousands of dollars, and you would need an enormous room for it. But I just was so haunted by it, and I was thinking, whoa, that's a great premise, just to have this couple buy one and then to start sort of playing with it, and just the whole notion of what a confessional is about, because there's another great Thornton Wilder quote. What is it? It's about art is all about revealing your secrets without telling your secret. It's sort of this both you want to get rid of it, but you also want to hide that it's yours. Yeah. And so where do you do that? In a confessional or in therapy, right? Mm-hmm. And heaven help if the priest or the person on the other side decides to, let it all go and hold it against you, which you might in a couple.
Well, it plays out, without giving it all away, I don't want to give it all away, but it's both logical and startling and surprising, but the logic, it drives it. Gee, what would you imagine yourself doing of an evening with your confessional, but you could not predict.
No, and there are also things that once you know a certain thing about someone, you might I mean, that's like the toothpaste out of the tube for sure. I mean, you're not going to forget. It definitely changes their relationship, and neither is like a pure person by any means.
Right.
They're pretty dark.
It's a great example, writers in the audience, of escalation, something that's an extremely pleasing and appealing narrative strategy, to employ. I wanted to ask you a little bit of a different question. In the New York Times, I think it was on the actual pub date, they did a by the book column with you, and I think the headline included your Henry James phobia.
Yeah.
What was that about again?
Well, it was just an honest answer. And I don't think I've gotten fully over it,
But you had just read, I think you said you had just read something of his.
Oh.
I know.
Yes, Isabel Archer.
Isabel Archer. Okay, right?
Yes.
Thank you.
Portrait of a Lady.
Thank you.
Yes. I did. Thank you.
And you said you were getting over your Henry James phobia. I think I have that too. In
well,
measure.
I mean, from our Bennington, I mean, there were, and many colleagues well versed in things I had not yet read.
There was a great moment. Oh, did I cut you off? Go ahead. No. There was a great moment, just to indulge us, a quick Bennington memory, when my beloved Mary Robeson came as a guest, and she was giving one of her talks. She had to give 2 talks and a reading, I think, and she was giving a talk, and it got to the questions from the audience. And someone said, it was one of those questions that really is saying, I'm smart, I'm smart. And that wasn't really a question, but it had to do with, wouldn't you say we first saw this narrative strategy employed in blah, blah, blah by Henry James? And, and Mary said, like I read that. Remember that? Well, back to Bennington again, because we have so many, as I said, so many years of co-teaching, and I've learned an absolute ton from Jill and her take on the work that we were reading and commenting on. And my memory, yours could be a little different, but my memory is that we had a run of stories in workshops that maybe had to do with the kind of family dysfunction, maybe attributed to one person in the family over and over again. And Jill summed it up, and I always wanted to have this on a T-shirt, and I'm going to let you say it.
Yes, in workshop, if it's not one thing, it's your mother. And if you're not sure what's missing in a story, I swear it works. You say, what do you know about this person's mother? And almost always, something.
If it's not one thing, it's your mother.
So occasionally it's the father, but usually it's the mother. No, I have to just feed the compliment back. I mean, Amy and I did this. We once did a humor lecture together.
Oh Lord, yeah.
But just the years of teaching, and I even before I met you, in the cemetery where Al Jolson is buried, was always on my reading list, and that is a story of regret. I mean, what we were talking about, and for me, that is a story that has served as a beacon. Doing, much of what we're talking about is regret, but there is humor woven. Yeah, those small details.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you. And I want to ask you to read a little bit more. In line with if it's not one thing, it's your mother. If you would read the beginning, and then it's total of 2 paragraphs. And if you would read this, the beginning of the last station, and then we'll do that one. I can point you to.
All righty.
But this is a perfect example of that.
The last station. Once a year, just as the dogwoods are about to come into bloom, Tori's mother straps a makeshift cross to her back and begins her trek across the front yard, stopping 12 times just as Jesus had done over 2,000 years before. She leaves out the last 2 stations, having never really incorporated resurrection into the show. With each stop, she shouts out various social injustices she has witnessed during the year. She was, for a time, artistic program director at the elementary school where she worked for 35 years as the librarian, elaborate productions of Alice in Wonderland and The Wizard of Oz to her credit. So, of course, she is aware of the dramatic and sometimes humorous effect her show has on those who stop and watch. Tori admires her mother and the many stands she takes, but it hasn't been easy to be her daughter, especially in childhood and adolescence, when she was regularly asked by other children, "Is she really your mother?" And it was confusing as to whether it was a compliment or an insult.
I'm going to turn to y'all for some questions in a moment, but I just had a question sort of come to me out of the blue. Do you, it seems to me that your characters do feel or do and want second chances, and you sometimes give them second chances. Is that something that propels a story for you, or does it just sort of turn up?
It is, and I think if I was at, how after you do this for a while, you do start to feel like you write the same story over and over. And I think whenever I've been asked that question, second chances is usually my answer. And I'm sort of pulling for them with the second chance, and it is that moment when the past, and present collide. Whatever brings them together that makes people, acknowledge, accept whatever they need to do to then be able to move forward and to have that second chance. So
There's, I won't remember which book, but there...
The Resurrection.
Resurrection. There was somewhere in one of Doris Lessing's books, the character, the woman in the book, in the novel, runs, smack into something again, and she asks herself, are you going to learn this time? No? Okay, maybe next time. And it kind of haunts me, that idea, and I do find that in the stories and in the longer works, the novels too.
Well, I've always told students, I think if you know what's the kryptonite for your character, what can really wound this person, and on the other end, what does that person treasure more than anything else? That's all you really need.
I agree, and I'll just close this portion by reminding, I'm sure you remember our friend Brett Anthony Johnston, who's a wonderful writer. He always says, don't, the old cliche, write what you know, and he says, don't write what you know is true, write what you fear is true.
That's great.
And that's come back to haunt me a bit as I think about something I might want to do. Thank you for writing these. Congratulations. Congratulations.
Thank you.
And we'll take questions. We have time for some questions.
Yes. And I think they have a mic.
Oh,
We'll be walking around with a microphone, so just raise your hand and we'll come over to you.
Oh, okay.
Great. Oh, and we can see people.
I have a really loud voice, but I will do this anyway.
For our live stream.
Oh. You mentioned a box earlier, so I was wondering, is it a literal box? And if so, how is it organized?
Sometimes it's a box, sometimes it's a grocery bag, sometimes it's a drawer. I just keep all these notes in one place. And organization is not my strong suit. But what's fun is to sit down with it all and start to put them together, the pieces that belong together. And then I give each one a folder. So I'll think all of this belongs in one story. And no, I am, and this is what has been so exciting, yet another thing, teaching with Amy all these years. We often agree in class, but we come at it from very different directions. This woman knows where her story is going when she starts to write it, and she very precisely and beautifully makes her way to that ending. Mine is a big mess of a mess, and then I just revise and revise and revise, and in the messiness I find my ending. She knows her ending.
I know the ending. I know the last line at the start, but I don't know what's in the middle. So you're right. Different ways.
Totally different.
But it works.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Oh, there's a bit.
Hey ladies, it's Camille.
Oh, hi, Camille.
Hi.
So I have a question that I came here tonight to ask you, Jill, and I hope I can articulate. It's around audience and who you're writing for or to. I find that when I read your stories as your audience, it feels like it's different a lot. I think about who you're writing towards. How do you conceive of audience while you're structuring these stories?
I actually try not to think of audience. when I'm writing because I think it terrifies me. I know as a student, the writer George Garrett once visited my class years ago, and he said, whoever comes in and judges you, or breathes down your neck while you're working, get them out of the room. And so I feel that if I introduce, if I have people in mind, then those people start talking. They say, oh, that's not how it happened, or they ask me questions, and so I really try to think only of the characters as if I'm witnessing reality when I do that first draft. Does that make sense?
So does that mean that you're kind of writing almost as though you're the audience at that moment, more writing for yourself?
Yeah. I mean, I feel like I'm witness to what's happening to these characters.
Interesting.
Is it?
Yeah.
Do you think of audience?
I think of 4 people.
You think of what?
I think of 4 actual people in my life, or.
Are they different depending on the story, or those?
It's a matter of thinking, would X think this was funny? Would Y wish she'd written that sentence? It's preposterous, as if, right? As if. And so it's like 4 people for 4 different important things that are important to me. And I just, like, what do I know? I just try to imagine that person reading that line. And I don't really go beyond that.
I'm going to try that.
It's kind of fun. It's fun because they're not seeing it. So what's the damage?
Yeah, as long as they don't start talking too much.
Right. I think there was somebody over in here.
Thank you.
Oh, hi.
I'm supposed to wait for a microphone, right?
I think so.
Oh, there's okay. It'll come. It's just somebody back there. Here it comes. Thank you.
Hello, ladies. I remember being in a seminar with the both of you, and one of the great things I remember, and I don't remember who said it, was what starts in Vegas, in vagueness, stays in vagueness.
Oh.
And that stayed in my head.
I have that T-shirt.
And I just wanted to talk about how, when you say you're not, like you don't know where you're going, and you say you always know where you're going, like how that.
But not how to get there.
Yeah, you know how to.
Yeah.
Just talk about how that works, because that first place is incredibly funny, but also it just, I would just be interested to hear how you turn that into a teaching technique.
Well, I think that's, when I slip into that area that is feeling vague, that is when I reach for those objects or something very specific, or a memory. And oftentimes when I'm not sure where to go, I do think of, what can I know about this person's life that nobody else in the story knows? And sometimes that's the little bit of magic information. And to distinguish vague from ambiguous, to go from like not being able to see anything to then being able to see several possibilities. And that's the one, I strive for.
I'd like to just ask, how many writers are here?
There are a lot of writers here. It's great.
I knew it.
I love it.
There's a writer not raising his hand, but we know. Cool. And there, somebody back there?
Hi. Congratulations, Jill.
Oh.
Nope.
Is that?
Nope.
Yes. Is that Manuel?
Yes.
How did you get here?
I'm a stranger.
It is so good to see you.
It's nice to see you both. This was a lovely conversation, and it was a great reading, Jill. I really enjoy the kinship that you both have, and piggybacking off of what you said earlier about in class, how you come to the same place, but from different directions. I'm curious because some of the writers who I'm closest with, they write very different than I do, and I always find that I'm drawn to writers who do things that I feel like I'm not very good at, or it's not the thing that I do, but we mesh really well because of that.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, like, have you found over this strong, long-lasting friendship that there is a kind of, not like a kinship also in the way you write, not that you're influencing each other, but do you talk about the things that you are thorning over while you're writing to each other because you know that this person's going to have a completely different take and that take might unlock something different? Or is it a locked box and you never that way go?
I can say one thing first. I mean, we don't send stuff back and forth all the time, but I really don't. I don't know about you, but I don't really do that with anybody.
I don't either.
But in another capacity, I am the fiction editor of a lovely literary and arts magazine, the Southampton Review, and I grabbed the title story for it. We bought Old Crimes. And ran that with a great deal of excitement and a great deal of feedback, in case I forgot to tell you, from readers who adored it. So there's some back and forth in other realms, related, but not quite what you're describing.
Yeah, and I think just talking about process, I mean, it's interesting. I was in a writing group in Boston years ago, and I realized we didn't swap work, and we didn't. We basically talked about life, and so there I was, in this little group with Jane Ann Phillips and other writers, and we were taught, oh my gosh, you guys are here. Her sons. And my kids are up here too. This is I'm so excited. And we talked about process. We talked about how do you get these kids doing what they're supposed to be doing so you can get to your keyboard. And so I think it's a lot. Or you've witnessed something funny or worthy of the page, and there's a lot of that kind of swap back and forth.
We could have done, an hour on her dogs. My dogs. We've seen over this immense amount of time. We've seen so many of our dogs from just born
from puppyhood
to the end. But there's. Oh God! It reminds me. There's a wonderful description, and I know who you're describing in one of these stories. A big yellow pudding of a dog.
Yes.
I know who that
Vanessa.
was. Vanessa. I think you named her, didn't you?
Yes.
Was it after Vanessa Williams?
Yes. Yes. Yes, Vanessa Williams would come on that commercial, and Rob was like, she is so beautiful. And so the puppy, that's
also beautiful, very beautiful.
Also beautiful.
We have a couple minutes. Over there. The mic's coming, I think.
Hello there. I'm very
next.
excited to be here. I studied with Amy some time ago at Southampton, and it was an amazing experience, and I love both your work.
We can't quite hear you.
I studied with you, Amy, at Southampton a few years ago. My name is Holly.
Hi.
So hi. And you're both just amazing writers, and it's so wonderful to be here. I was so happy you read part of Lineman, because that is one of my favorite stories in the collection. And as Amy was saying, the personal but also the big, and I find as I'm getting older, I am sort of saying like, oh, this is not the world that I grew up in. My friend and I were just talking about like department stores going out of business and how everybody shops online. But you were really able to take a phenomenon that's going on in the world with the internet and communications, and not a lot of people having old-fashioned telephones, but make it personal. And I was wondering what the genesis of that story was for you.
There's a lot of me in the line because I will often think, okay, so what are you going to do when the blackout comes, and and I am someone, I still have my little password book, and I have my paper calendar and all these things. I still write longhand a lot.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah, I mean, my first drafts are sketches, but a lot longhand, and I'm just connected to that process, and I do worry about the lack of memorization. I mean, sometimes if I can't sleep, what I do is I go through all the telephone numbers of my childhood, but I could not tell you my own cell phone number, right? Sometimes, but I can remember neighbors, my grandmother, on and on and on with those numbers, and I don't know. I think there's something being lost with that kind of memorization. I don't know.
And we're going to end with one question from our live stream, which is from Margaret. Has your process to writing short stories changed since you first began writing them?
Has the process changed? Is that the question?
Yes.
Yes, it has changed a lot, because I think in the beginning I really thought that I could take the scraps that didn't fit into a novel and turn them into a story. And that was just such a cheap, disrespectful thing to do to those stories. And they did not. I think they oftentimes were just hitting one chord, and over time I've come to think of each story the same way I would a mini novel, and really trying to give the illusion of opening doors and windows to a bigger stage behind these characters, which I had never done. So I think over time they have changed, and I have those stories that I look back and sort of see as those plateau stories where I felt like I had hit something new that I was trying to reach. Thank you for that question.
And maybe the last question, there's a gentleman over here against the wall, had his hand up for a while.
Yeah, thank you for that, yes.
There he is.
Hi, Jill. It's Jay Fleischman.
Oh, hey, Jay.
I'm the
from
brother
my
of Jill's good friend.
Come on.
From her town. But I was very taken with Old Crimes, the first story, and I wanted to ask you, a man takes off his belt. That metaphor, which the way you work it in that story, it has all these multiple meanings.
Yeah.
It's so well done. It's so interesting with all those different meanings and how you could apply it. How did you come up with that?
Thank you for that. I gave the character was given the assignment to generate a prompt based on an object, and then to sort of see a lot of different characters through it. And I like to come up with prompts anyway. And so the prompt she comes up with is, in a room behind a door, a man takes off his belt. And so her object is the belt. And, because it can be a slap, it can be a song, it can be a drink. It's like a snake. It can be menacing and threatening, or it's just a belt. Sometimes a belt is just a belt. And so I had a lot of fun placing that belt, because then the belts do show up throughout the collection, and that was something that started happening naturally. But back to your question, when I saw that they were thematically kind of echoing and talking to one another, a few more belts got laced in. I mean, the lineman wears a great big heavy belt. All he feels is relief, you know, to get out of it. But there are quite a few that are threatening. So thank you, Jay. It's great to see you.
Thank you, everybody. I think we're at our time, and Jill's going to sign.